Okay, so we're all sort of ready. I think maybe Shabbat Shalom for openers. Hello, my name's Jer, and I'm a Feast of Tabernacles overeater. Welcome to our meeting today, everybody. Is it wrong to dream of fudge? Yes, we're here to put the feast in the feast week, right? It has been wonderful. Although I did nick myself shaving, I don't know if you can see that, you YouTubers, nick myself shaving and that lemon pie filling that Charlene made kind of oozed out, so. Just a little bit, just a little bit. Okay, shall we? We shall. This message contains coarse language for those not ready for the truth. Listener and viewer discretion is advised. I'm calling it What is Truth? How original, huh? I'm about one of a billion people who probably asked that, starting with Pilate. Remember Pilate? Boy, he could really pilot about 4 feet high, as a matter of fact. What is truth? He asked Yeshua that. And yeah, it's true. Many people have asked the same question over time. But even a bigger question is, how do we find the answer to that question, what is truth, in a world that is led by the spirits of deception and stupidity, and where much of the information controlled by those who so often deny the very existence of truth? What is truth other than what people believe to be true? This is the satanic doctrine of demons called relativism. That's what they basically have as their conceptual foundation. What is truth other than what people believe to be true? And they say, since there are so many people inhabiting the earth with so many different viewpoints, how can there be just one truth? That's the question that they lay to seed all kinds of confusion and deception and stupidity in the world. That's what relativism's motto is. They say what is accepted as truth is relative to a person's situation or viewpoint. And it also denies that any one viewpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. So that's the concept that they use and teach, because they furthermore say if truth is relative, then only indefinite answers exist for the purpose and meaning of life. So, is there any absolute truth in this complex, uncertain world of insanity? And we believers and believers in general of Yeshua should be saying, yeah, there is. However, how do we respond to people who want us to explain to them why we so readily say God's word is the absolute truth? Because when Yeshua returns and he shows himself to be absolutely real, there are going to be so many people who need answers. And they're going to turn to those like us who have been in Yeshua boot camp for a lot of years and learning as we have been learning and continue to learn. They're going to turn to us to teach them along with Yeshua. So we can't just brush them off, with a generalized standard response of saying, well, God's word is the absolute truth, the end, see you next week, and we're out. Because they'll have all kinds of questions. They'll demand answers. Because those people have been brought up, trained, and conditioned by relativism all of their lives. And it has been going on for ever. It starts in school, for decades and decades. Children in public school have been told, well, you must not be judgmental. You must not be judgmental. What's right for you might be wrong for somebody else. Or what's true for you may not be true for somebody else. After all, truth is relative, Many people believe that science can reveal truth. Science is a useful tool, there's no doubt about it. However, it is far from perfect. It's not about truth. Science is not about the truth, it's about trying to get closer to the truth. So in our time together today, we're going to need to overcome, first of all, some common misconceptions about people holding about the truth. First misconception is that all truth is relative. An opinion does not determine reality. For example, I can choose to believe that the earth is flat. Fact of the matter, the absolute truth of the matter is that it's not. It's a sphere. It's an orb. However, I may still choose to believe that it's flat. I would be wrong, but that's my relative understanding of it. In other words, claiming that all truth is relative is saying there are no absolutes. Yet if someone says that to you, there are no absolutes, we should have to ask them, are you absolutely sure there are no absolutes? Because them saying there are no absolutes is an absolute statement. So they in fact cancel themselves out. It's a contradictory statement. So is the statement all truth is relative true? No, it's not. It's a self-refuting statement. It contradicts itself. Other examples could be, I'm a truthful liar. I'm an honest thief. I'm a compassionate killer. Those statements are all false. They're contradictory, self-defeating, oxymorons, like jumbo shrimp, plastic glasses, limited lifetime warranty, and my personal favorite, political intelligence. So moral relativism would say each person is entitled to act on his or her own system of right and wrong, regardless of the results. Hitler applied this same philosophy, and it produced the murder of 6 million Jews. However, if right and wrong is relative, then he was just as entitled to act on his system of belief as you and I are. And if you're thinking and saying, well, that's just stupid, that's absurd. It is. And that's exactly the point. To continue to force feed the idea of moral and ethical relativism is absurd. It's filling the world with chaos and more deception and more stupidity. For example, let's say you pull into the lot at 7-Eleven. You want to just zip in and you get a Slurpee or whatever. Just one item, you're just going to be in and out and gone. So you leave the car running outside. You head in, you get your item, you're at the cashier ready to cash out. You look out and somebody has gotten into your car and is preparing to drive away with it. And you bolt outside and say, hey, wait, you can't do that. And they say, well, that's just your opinion. You say, no, that's my car. You can't do that. And they say, well, why should I listen to you? All truth is relative. And he takes off. So that brings us to misconception number 2 now, which is all views are equally valid, which is partly a restatement of the first misconception that all truth is relative. Let's say you've been attacked with a brain tumor, and it's been diagnosed as cancerous. You need treatment. Would you go to a neurologist, brain surgeon at the U of A, or would you go over here on 75th Street and talk to the sales manager at Freedom Ford? Okay, hey, come on, if all views are equally valid. See what the point is of that? Like, once upon a time, some people were taught that the Earth was the center of the solar system. The sun wasn't. Well, we know now, the empirical evidence, the data shows that it is the sun that is the center. So are each of these views equally valid and true? No, they're mutually exclusive, so both cannot be true at the same time. The data shows the center of our solar system is the sun. So let's apply this same reasoning to consider the question of Yeshua's identity now, okay? Christianity claims that Yeshua, the Son of God, is God. Islam acknowledges Yeshua is a great prophet, but he's not God. Judaism, Hinduism believes Yeshua is a great moral teacher, but that's it. Can all of those views be equally valid when they all contradict one another? No, of course not. So all views cannot be equally valid or true. One has to look at the evidence available to observe that which is true apart from just an opinion. Which brings us now to misconception number 3 about the truth. And this one says, it's wrong to force your views on another person. And this is a deceptive statement. You can really see Satan's fingerprints all over this one. It's wrong to force your views on another person. There's an element of truth in that, but it doesn't really get to the heart of the issue accurately. First of all, no person can force you to believe anything because we all have been given free will choice. Now, second, most, if not everybody, would agree that it's unacceptable to use force or manipulation or bulldozing or bullying or coercion to attempt to persuade a person. Now, when those first 2 issues are cleared up, we get to the real underlying misconception, which is that some people falsely think it's wrong to hold one view above another since they believe that all truth is relative. And that misconception results in falsely thinking that it's unacceptable to attempt to prove that any specific view in question is false. Yet people who hold that view will forcibly argue with you that their view should be the only one that matters. So we're just a weird bunch, basically. So the real issue is it acceptable to attempt to persuade somebody to a specific view while preserving their freedom to accept or reject that view? And the answer is yeah, it is, because it's done all the time in this big marketplace of ideas. Let's say, for example, you have a friend who confides in you that they're thinking about committing suicide. Wouldn't you try to convince them of the contrary? We have, in fact, a moral responsibility to communicate truth to others for their own well-being. See, persuasion can be both morally right and the responsible thing to do. If a medical researcher absolutely found the cure for cancer, would it be acceptable for them to just keep it quiet, not tell anybody, because they wouldn't want to push their views and stand on anybody else? Of course not. They should communicate the truth as clearly and immediately as possible, and then allow each person to make up their own mind, accept or reject the solution. Okay, so those are some of the major misconceptions about the truth. So now it's time to look at the proper foundation for truth. So far, we have seen that objective and absolute truth does indeed exist, and the truth, this truth, is not relative. So since there are absolute laws, does it not stand to reason that there must be an absolute lawgiver? And since there is ultimate truth, does it not suggest that there must be one who is ultimately true? This lawgiver, therefore, must be the source of both natural law and special revelation. Our Creator God is the ultimate lawgiver. He's the source of all truth. And there's nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong, with considering the ultimate authority to be the ultimate authority. And since an absolute, morally perfect God exists, then by his very nature, he is the absolute authority for what is good and what is not. Truth is objective because God exists outside of us. It's universal because God is above all. And it's constant because God is eternal. And we must realize that it's impossible to arrive at an objective, universal, and constant standard of truth and morality without bringing God into the equation. Therefore, there is only one source for objective, absolute truth: God. And Yeshua has already told us that he is the way, the truth, and the life. And Yeshua transforms a person's heart. And when we say heart here, and when the Bible says heart, it's not talking about the blood pump in your chest. It's talking about your mindset. And it tells us to transform our minds, our hearts, in effect. So when Yeshua always does this, he changes not only what we do, but also what we desire and want to do. He transforms our hungers. And as soon as anybody allows him an unbiased hearing and says that they are really willing to listen, that's when they will understand what truth really is. So let's go back to the conversation between Pilate and Yeshua. And notice some things here. First of all, notice how Pilate deliberately brings every possible tension into the dialogue: racial tension, political tension, those and all the other issues that were beating down heavily upon the society and culture in the biblical era of that time. And he's trying to draw Yeshua into controversy and into the seat of condemnation. So we can pick this up in Matthew chapter 27, verse 11. If you have it, great. If not, I'm going to read it anyway. So here we go. Matthew 27, starting in verse 11, says, "Now Yeshua stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, 'Are you the king of the Jews?'" And don't lose the context of all of this, because, first of all, this is Pilate. This is the governor of the Roman Empire. He is a powerful, influential man, and he's purposely framing a question in a particular way to create this political disconnect with society. So he says to Yeshua, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Yeshua answers him with his own question. That's the Socratic method he learned from Q along the way. So Pilate says to Yeshua, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Yeshua says, "Is that your idea? Or did others talk to you about me?" If you look back in the verses, more often than not, when Yeshua was asked a question, he questioned the questioner before responding, which is important, because when we question those who are questioning us before answering, two things are established. First of all, you force the questioner to reveal his or her assumptions. You force their hand into disclosing what their really agenda is, or they have any preconceived notions about you. And second, it determines the entry point of the discussion. So Pilate says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" to Yeshua, and Yeshua says, "Is that your own idea, or did somebody set you up here to come and talk to me?" Intent occurs before content. Because Yeshua needs to know where Pilate stands in all of this, because if you give truth, absolute truth, to somebody who's not seeking it, all it does is provide that person all sorts of more avenues to misinterpret it. So Pilate says, after Yeshua says to him, "Is that your own idea, or someone set you up?" He says, "Well, am I a Jew? It was your people and chief priests that handed you over to me. What is it you've done?" Yeshua says, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But my kingdom is from another place." And Pilate says, "So you are a king then." And here comes the real answer. Yeshua said, "You're right in saying that I'm a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this reason I came into the world to testify to that truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." And that's after that statement, that's when Pilate says, "Well, what is truth?" "I came into the world to testify to the truth," Yeshua says. "Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." So not only does he lay out his testimony, he turns it again on Pilate, on his questioner, and he says to him, in effect, Whether you're listening to the truth or not is going to be demonstrated by how you respond to what I'm saying. That was a pretty bold, audacious response. I mean, this is Pilate, the governor of the Roman Empire, and Yeshua didn't back off, was not intimidated one little bit. Only someone who's walking in absolute truth can be that bold, and he was. He did the same thing with, he did the same thing with a lot of people, but in particular, Thomas, doubting Thomas. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, Thomas. No one comes to the Father except through me. Truth is the most valuable commodity in this world. You know who said that? I did. I just said that. Aren't you paying attention?
Jordan distracted me.
Are you paying attention, YouTubers? Do not make me come out there. Winston Churchill said this. Winston Churchill said, truth is the most valuable commodity in this world. He also said, in fact, it's so valuable, it's often protected by a bodyguard of lies. Sounds like a Churchill statement, isn't it? Yeah. He said this actually, he was referring to military intelligence when he made this statement. Nathan Sharansky, former Justice Minister of Israel, one-time political prisoner in the former Soviet Union, who'd been incarcerated for a lengthy period of time, most of it in solitary confinement, was released, and before he went back to his homeland of Israel, he asked his authorities, who had kept him in prison for that long, if he could return one day to see the prison again, and they granted him his request. So he came back, bringing his wife with him, and just before they went in to see where he'd been held and incarcerated, he put his arm in hers and he said, "Dear, could you allow me to go in first, because I want to see this place again. I have some moments I want to rethink, because it was in that solitary confinement that I discovered what truly is important in life." So she allowed him to go in, and he stepped back into the prison, in these dark confines of this small room where he'd been held for so long, spent his moments, stepped back out, asked the guards if he could visit the grave of Andrei Sakharov, a Soviet physicist who'd given the former Soviet Union the atomic bomb. He asked them for a wreath, took it to the grave site, laid the wreath, turned around and saw this barrage, this battery of cameras and microphones. All the media was there wanting to interview him. And before he allowed them any questions, he said, "Mr. Sakharov gave to us here," meaning the Soviet Union, "the atomic bomb. Before he died, he said, I always thought the most powerful weapon in the world was this bomb. It isn't. It's the truth." And he said that. He said that to a nation that had been taught living lies. Satan is the father of all lies, the author of all that is not of God. And there is a science and a skill to lying, this art of deceit that Satan and his followers have used to condition the entire world from the beginning. And you have Churchill, on one hand, of this free world acknowledging truth's value, and Sakharov from a world where propaganda was the norm, acknowledging the value of truth. And, ironically, the writers of the Oxford Dictionary just last year introduced for the first time in a couple of 2-3 years a first new word into the dictionary as post-truth. Post-truth. We're living in a post-truth society. What does post-truth actually mean? A couple of things. There's a soft definition, which is that most people today don't really care about facts, the truth. They just care about their feelings. In other words, they're saying, "No, I don't want to hear the truthful facts about this. Just tell me something that makes me feel good." The entire election process in the United States has been clouded by that phrase, post-truth. And didn't Yeshua warn us about those who tickle our ears, especially in these end days? Are we really hearing the truth? The hard definition of post-truth is not that you merely don't care about facts and are more concerned about your feelings, but that you are even willing to use lies and distortions and deceptions as long as in your mind the result is worth pursuing. The end justifies your means. So that a person can spread lies and fabrications and complete fake news under this umbrella of believing that their cause is noble. That's what they go on, post-truth, which is a description of this 21st century schizoid man. Science gave the world the principle of evidence-based empirical fact, which did away with the burning of the witches and political decisions based in superstition. Truth became a force. But, well, nowadays, truth can get in the way of agendas. And the result today is that truth is established not by evidence, but by repetition of accusations and falsehoods. It's common. In fact, it's going on right now, or has been, especially in the last week in the U.S. Routine tactics for both U.S. parties and global parties to produce someone, in this case of the last week, a woman, to bring accusations of sexual harassment and misconduct and abuse or assault against any heterosexual male appointee or nominee that either party regards to be out of step with its agenda. It happens so regularly that no sane person can possibly believe the accuser, because these women who have come forward, I'm talking about, if you don't know, Brett Kavanaugh, Mr. Trump's appointee for the Supreme Court, the women that have been paid to do what they did are as much victims as Mr. Kavanaugh. They've just been used by Hillary and Dianne Feinstein and the people of the Democratic Party. The Democrats don't care about these ladies and how their lives are now being ruined as well. I watched a little bit of this Ford lady, the first one who made the first accusation, and she looks like, to me, she has gone through abuse in her life, sexual abuse. She looks like it. But her story just fell apart in about 2 minutes. It didn't hold any water. So she and Kavanaugh's lives are really under the spotlight. And Dianne Feinstein is backpedaling soon as Miss Ford's story began to fall apart. Dianne Feinstein, who is the orchestrator of all of this, with George Soros writing the checks, she started backpedaling right away. She wouldn't hold up any witnessing for the young lady. No, she didn't want to be accused of perjury, so she got out of there right pronto. And the second woman's account was even less believable than the first woman. Totally lacking credibility. Somebody should have told that second woman, I think Ramirez was her name, wasn't it? Yeah, Ramirez. That when you name witnesses who allegedly support your account, you first might want to check to see if they're going to actually lie for you, which they wouldn't. I remember hearing a couple of 2-3 weeks ago, the New Yorker newspaper, they actually broke the story on this second accuser's account, and they actually admitted they couldn't even place Mr. Kavanaugh at the scene of the alleged party in which this alleged incident happened, and that was even after interviewing dozens of witnesses. And you know what? They ran the story anyway, on the front page. So much for journalistic integrity. The New Yorker newspaper isn't fit to housebreak your puppy. When the smoke clears from this travesty, because that's what it is, it really is, President Trump should investigate Dianne Feinstein, who is the mastermind of all these lies, as well as the women and that former porn lawyer who was somehow getting into the act. If those liars can be put away in some deep, dark cell for a term consistent with perjury, maybe future Democratic Socialist Party members will think twice about perpetrating all these lies designed to ruin people's lives, even ruin nations' lives, because America has sunk to the point of being a national reality show, and that is it. And what we have described here is a post-truth, truth-free world. There's no place for truth in the world that the West has created. Western hostility to truth is overwhelming. Overwhelming. Elites like George Soros and innumerable tax-financed government agencies spend taxpayers' money discrediting those who tell the truth. That's their agenda. Many in governments want truth tellers locked up. They consider them enemies of the state. And by that they mean enemies of the self-interests of the ruling elites. Never in history have people been so near to losing all comprehension of reality as in today's world, in which there is no respect for truth. Normally, we place value on the truth. So if Yeshua says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and if Yeshua is giving us all we need to know about the truth, what does that really mean? Yeshua's answers conform to reality, God's reality. His answers are relevant. They provide meaning in our lives. First of all, he talks about people's conditions and the total depravity of the heart. Not this one. The heart. Total depravity. Not merely just in our actions, but in our conditions. We're alienated from God. There's kind of that clenched fist and gritted teeth on the inside, as if to say to God, what do you think you're doing? Who do you think you are? How can you possibly think that you know best what's for me? That's why people resist God's word as absolute truth. You could put in front of them, and we've heard this said a few times in this assembly, you could put concise, empirical evidence about God's word being the absolute truth right in front of these people, and their intellect will fight it. We as people do not like to accept or admit it, but our human heart mindset is depraved, and it's told to us in the Bible. Jeremiah 17 verse 9. The heart, the mindset, is deceitful. Other translations, many of them say desperately wicked. Either way, it's the same thing. The heart is deceitful or desperately wicked above all things, beyond cure. Who can understand it? Have you ever read any writings, books about Hitler's regime and those that were with him in the hierarchy, or even seen documentaries? All the evil wickedness they did against humanity. Every one of those writings included a common phrase describing Hitler and his henchmen. The phrase was, they were ordinary people. They were ordinary people who did wicked, extraordinarily horrific things. In Auschwitz, where the death camps were, people were eliminated at 12,000 a day. 12,000 people exterminated a day. Joseph Mengele doing his experimentations on children, a lot of children, castrating young boys, especially if they were twins. All this butchering done by a people that was supposedly the most educated nation at the time. In front of the gas chamber, there was a sign, Hitler's words, I want to see a generation of young people devoid of all conscience, imperious, relentless, and cruel. Imperious, relentless, and cruel. And then the people were herded by the hundreds into the room. They were told they were going to be deloused, given showers, stripped naked, so they're crammed in there, flesh against flesh. They hear the big iron doors slam shut, turn the spigots on, and the guards said the last thing they heard coming from inside the room was, gas! And they were gone. Ordinary people doing extraordinarily, desperately wicked things. Who can understand it?
Jerry, would that be like Schindler's List?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. In Nuremberg, where the judges were all tried, There's an amazing example here of the satanic doctrine of relativism. It's revealed through a couple of paintings hanging on the walls. First one is behind the magistrate's bench. It's a rendering of God's instructions to Moses for the Israelites, the Ten Commandments. And there's another painting as you exit the courtroom. It's of the Garden of Eden, depicting Satan tempting the first of mankind, Adam and Eve. And the inscription is, "You will be as God." Amazing example of this diametrically opposed world truths in which we have to walk. Either we shall live by God, or we become a law unto ourselves. The 20th century turned out to be the bloodiest in history. So far, more were killed in battlefields and on them than the previous 19 combined. And if you look at that example, you might be led to conclude that that's what darkness and sin is all about. But that would be a mistake, because nothing is going to change until we, each and every one, looks into our own heart, into our own mind, and admits that, you know what, I am a creature in rebellion against Father God. Inside I have a clenched fist and gritted teeth, defying our Father in heaven. The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Anybody free of all those three? That's why Yeshua said, the heart is desperately wicked above all things and beyond cure. Who can understand it? All truth has its roots in God. God spoke the world into existence through his word, Yeshua, which is truth. Truth contains God's entire plan and purpose, and without it, man is without purpose or hope. Satan's lie that he spoke out in Genesis 3, "You will surely not die," has always been the foundation of pagan religions, traditions that blind us from truth and cause us to wander aimlessly in religious systems for an entire lifetime. Many traditions of the Christian world are only pagan sun god rituals, all inherited from our ancestors, who were forced to compromise with the Roman Emperor Constantine or lose their life for not bowing down. Most of those traditions imported directly from Babylon. There's not a single religion practiced upon the earth today that has not been polluted by Nimrod's rebellion against the one true God at the Tower of Babel. The Hebrew Scriptures, which are the first 5 books in the First Testament, Moses' writings, or Torah, those Hebrew Scriptures expose the perverted traditions of man-made religions and offer reality, truth, to those who hunger and thirst for it. Paul wrote in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 14 to 17, that we should not be misled by traditions and commandments of men, but rather rely on a proven and tested source of truth, the Torah. The children of Israel camped at Mount Sinai for an entire year as Moses received and passed on the instructions from the Creator. Those instructions, the Torah in Hebrew, taught them then, they teach us now, to govern ourselves and throw off the shackles of man-made religious, political, economic, educational, medical systems. Yeshua, or as many know and refer to him by his Gentile nickname of Jesus, warned his followers that traditions taught by religious leaders are like leaven or yeast that once mingled with dough cannot be removed. And without the Torah of God, it's impossible to separate the traditions of men from the rules of the Almighty. That English word of ours, tradition, comes from a Greek word, tradier, which means to lay into the hands of another. Now, when someone lays something into your hands, you expect the intention of the gift and the gift to be good. However, it is the responsibility of the recipient to check on it, to inspect the gift. Traditions can be good, and boy, can they be evil the burden of proof falls on the recipient. In Jeremiah 16, verse 19, it says that in the last days the Gentiles will come to Israel and cry out, "Surely our fathers have inherited lies." Well, if our fathers inherited lies, what they passed on to us does not become the truth because they had a good intention or they were sincere. Traditions are given to us innocently. They are accepted in ignorance, which makes us, the blind, following the blind. Those leading us may have not had any intention of misleading us, however, they are nonetheless blind. So what is truth? Truth means reality, God's reality, that which is. Truth is reality whether one believes it or not. A person can believe a lie their entire life and it will never change into truth just to suit their belief system. If we're to live the truth, we have to constantly challenge the belief systems that we have inherited from our parents, from our religious leaders, from those who govern the nations, and we also have to always challenge ourselves as to what we are believing, and the way we're thinking. When I first started getting into the Bible and reading and studying, I developed this image, this visual of Daniel. I always looked at him as this young boy in the lion's den. And then over time, I developed another mental image of Daniel. It was more like the old Daniel. He was in his 80s now. New image of him. In a place of prominence. In Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar, and then Belshazzar, and then Darius, who had been deceived into commanding that Daniel, his vice president, should be executed. Daniel and his Hebrew buddies, his companions, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, were raised in Jerusalem. They, from the time they were young boys, youth, had been taught Torah. They knew the Hebrew scriptures inside out. And when they were carried away to be captives in Babylon, they were renamed. Daniel became Balthasar. The others, Shadrach and Benny, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. They were all made eunuchs, because that was the custom. When they brought somebody into Babylon, men, they didn't want any kind of diseases coming with them, so they made them eunuchs. And they became in the care of Ashpenaz, master of the eunuchs, and trained for service in the king's court. Daniel was promoted to prime minister under Nebuchadnezzar and was made an extremely wealthy young man. Daniel's wealth, you have to remember, was multiplied twice over after Nebuchadnezzar, because the reign of Belshazzar took over and then Darius the Mede. Daniel did okay for himself. He also bought some penny stocks in BCM, I hear. He was one of the richest men in the kingdom, in the Babylonian kingdom. And for more than 60 years, Daniel was the CEO in charge of the Chaldeans, that group of highly trained astronomers, intellectuals, among whom were many Judean captives. Near the end of his life, Daniel was visited by Gabriel, the angel, given very exact timing concerning the coming of the Messiah. However, he was also instructed to zip it, seal up that information, because it was for him and him alone to act on it. Well, Daniel died in Babylon, a eunuch, no heir to whom he could leave his fortunes. He was extremely wealthy and extremely prophetically well informed. He made some very wise and mindful plans for the distribution of his treasures. So after the 70 years of captivity had concluded, many of the Jews, especially those in positions of responsibility, stayed behind in Babylon, most notable being Mordecai and his niece Hadassah, that we know better as probably Queen Esther. Daniel would have naturally assigned the execution of his will to his most trusted companions, the Hebrew astronomers he had trained that had remained behind in Babylon. There is a reason for every word in the Bible, in scriptures, regardless of how trivial or unimportant they may seem to us. But if you mindfully consider the scriptures and the historical records, truth is revealed. So what happened to Daniel's wealth? Would be almost 500 years before his treasures reappear in the writings of the Bible. If you ask an average person on the street these days, how many wise men came bearing gifts to Yeshua, they most often reply, 3. And they'll also tell you that the baby Yeshua was wearing swaddling clothes, right? Lying in a manger. Is that truth?
No.
Not according to the testimony of the scriptures. In Matthew 2, verse 1 and then verse 11, we read that an undesignated number of wise men, magi in the Greek, came to the house and found the young child, a toddler, living with his mother Mary and his earthly father Joseph. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2, verse 16, we read that only the shepherds arrived at the manger and saw the baby, Yeshua. The reason we are here today and celebrating this feast time of tabernacles is because this is the time of the year Yeshua was born, not December 25th, when the pagan sun gods were and are always worshipped. Yeshua's birth was an intermediate fulfillment of the Feast of Sukkot, or mangers. Joseph was required to live in a sukkah, or tabernacle, during the whole 7-day feast. Mary, his wife, pregnant, didn't have to. That was not a requirement. She didn't have to be in the tabernacle. However, it was the feast time, and the Bethlehem Holiday Inn was booked solid. Couldn't even find a little bed and breakfast with a place to stay. And everybody was in town from all around for the feast days. So Mary did join her husband in the sukkah for the feast and delivered her firstborn son there. That was the moment that the Word was made flesh and sukkoted, or tabernacle, dwelt among us. And to suggest or even imply that there was this lonesome trio laden down with treasures and gold and myrrh and all other sorts of gifts, that there was just 3 of them who journeyed for years, because that's how long it took, across a barren, torrid desert outside the protection of an armed caravan, is not sound reasoning. They wouldn't have been worthy of their title wise men had they done that. These magi, which was just a common term applied to Chaldean astronomers, were the descendants of the Jewish astronomers Daniel had trained and entrusted with his wealth in Babylon. And following Daniel's instructions, these astronomers, who were always looking for the truth, to discern more knowledge and wisdom, they watched the sky for more than 500 years, searching for the great sign in the heavens. And it finally occurred on Tishri 1 at the end of the 4th millennium. They saw the constellation Bethula, which means virgin, clothed with the setting sun, first sliver of the new moon beneath her feet, and in the 12 stars above her head was the planet Hatzadik, means the righteous. Today that planet is known as Jupiter. Hatzadik came into conjunction with the star Hamalek, king in the constellation of Ariel, the lion of Judah. So on the first day of Tishri, trumpets, this one time celestial alignment announced the coming of the Messiah, the birth of Malek Tzaddik, or righteous King of Kings, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the way, the truth, and the life. And Satan has been conspiring to hide that truth, to deceive the whole world since the time of Nimrod, Tower of Babel. Mind control or mind conditioning is focused on planting false realities However, that program would have no chance of succeeding unless people were already married to the notion of asking, well, what is truth? Wouldn't stand a chance. Definition, relativism. Should know it by now, but I'll repeat it for you again. Relativism states that what is accepted as truth is relative to a person's situation or viewpoint, and it denies any one viewpoint uniquely privileged over all others. Definition, realism. The quality or fact of representing a person, thing, or situation accurately or in a way that is true to life. Definition, censorship. The institution, system, or practice of censoring. Definition, narrative. A way of presenting or understanding a situation or series of events that reflects and promotes a specific point of view or set of values. Definition, scheming. The forming of a plan. Definition, narcissist. A person who has an excessive interest in or admiration of themselves, thinking the world revolves around them. Isaiah 14, verse 12 to 16. Yeshua says to narcissist Satan, "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of meeting in the uttermost parts of the north. I will ascend above the high places of the clouds. I will make myself like El Elyon. Yet you will be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest parts of the pit. Those who see you will stare at you, reflecting on what has become of you. Is this the one who shook the earth, who made kingdoms tremble?" Definition, dogma or doctrine. A point of view or tenet put forth as authoritative without adequate grounds. Hence your doctrines of demons. Narcissists are renowned for using psychological projection. They blame other people, even when it is entirely apparent that they are the ones in the wrong. And that is the absolute truth about how Satan's deceived the whole world to not observe the feast days, to accept the false narrative of the world's holidays instead of Father God's holy days, and keep people stuck in Babylon where his scheme started. And it's up to us, those of us who have been trained with Yeshua and are still in boot camp here, trained in the way, the truth, and the life. It's up to us to be of good courage and walk in his truth. Trust the plan, God's plan. That's the truth. Thank you.